Grab your fedora and your bullwhip, because this simple but two-fisted game of mystery, adventure, and exploration is going to take us very easily to King Solomon's Mines or to the Temple of Doom. Ladies and gentlemen, Vieja Escuela Pulp. Hello dear friends, this is DM Pablo bringing you another review of an OSR game, in this case Vieja Escuela Pulp. If you saw the previous review about Vieja Escuela, a game by Javier Garcia Cabo Hicks, it's a fantasy game, very light rules, light 16 pages, coming out of Spain, translated into English by yours truly. And this, one of the things that we saw in the review, if you want to see it, here is a little note for it. Is that this game is extremely hackable, and in very little time it has produced several expansions and hacks, and this one is the first. It was written by Mr. Ramon Balcells, who has an amazing channel for those of you who speak Spanish called Rol en Familia. If you are like me and you like to play with your kids and understand Spanish, Mr. Balcells has great advice of how to get your kids into the hobby, certainly worthwhile watching. And he got together with the creative team of which would later be Grapas y Mapas, and created this pulp adventure game based on the rules by Javier Garcia Cabo Hicks that he put out in Vieja Escuela. Like Vieja Escuela, this game is absolutely free. You can download it as a PDF from the grapasymapas.com website. You can also get a physical copy from Lulu, which in America at least, it's $3.06 plus shipping. Unfortunately, currently, Vieja Escuela Pulp is only available in Spanish. I am working on a translation of the rules, which should be out soon. But truly, if you have read Vieja Escuela in the English translation and you understand how the rules work, there is very little else aside from the character classes that you need to know to start playing Vieja Escuela Pulp. So I hope that in this review, especially I'm going to go deep into the character creation, you might have enough of an inkling, and then when the translation comes out, you can start with two fists going into your pulp adventures. Without further ado, Vieja Escuela Pulp by Ramon Balcells, laid out and designed by the team of Grapas y Mapas, Mr. Eneco Menica and Eneco Palencia. Welcome. So this is the cover of Vieja Escuela Pulp. As you see, it emulates old pulp comic book, pulp adventure comic books, and the cover is actually taken from a public domain comic books series. It says, "Damn it, Anne, this is not a mummy. I think it is the professor." Quite evocative and really true to the spirit of the fanzine roots of this game and this community. It proves that you don't have to have a lot of resources to start gaming and to start doing your own games. Later you will see that this team has actually created games with original art, and it's amazing. But Vieja Escuela, is one of the early attempts of the community to create and expand this world universe, used available, affordable options. So I really love this front cover. As a matter of an introduction, there's a short paragraph in the inside cover that says that Vieja Escuela Pulp uses the same rules as Vieja Escuela, the role-playing game, but it is for a pulp environment. Like Vieja Escuela, it doesn't waste time saying, oh, this is a role-playing game and this is how you do it. It assumes that you know basically what a role-playing game is. It is just giving you a simpler way of gaming. And in character creation, this is obvious. It gives you the 6 attributes from Dungeons and Dragons: strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. The method here is 46 6 times, and you take the worst die in each throw. This might sound too 5th edition-y for some people. The grognards will say, well, we want the 3d6 down the line, but do be mindful. Pulp games are very lethal, even more lethal than fantasy old-time games. Here you don't have plate armor, and as we're gonna see, the characters don't have as many talents as in the fantasy version of the game. In the fantasy version of the game, each fantasy race that you pick gave you 2 talents, and your class gave you 2. Here, there's of course no fantasy races, you just have 2 talents. So characters have a little less to be going on. They're more human, so this edge that this method methodology of 6 times, choose, and then adjudicate to whatever ability you want might be helpful to begin characters that are viable, at least for the first 10 minutes of the adventure. Like Vieja Escuela, very meager bonuses. 18 gives you a +2, 15 and 17 give you a +1, and everything else in the middle in that sweet bell curve of a 3d6 is a 0. You're going to have to get through this game through your player ability, not through bonuses that your character gives you. Once you have your abilities, you choose your character class. Now, this is Pulp Adventure, so it's not going to be fighter or rogue, although I do think that a fantasy fighter talents from Vieja Escuela or a rogue could also be plugged in. If you're a criminal or if you are more like a tribal fighter, I think the talents and hit dice of the game can be plugged and hacked into it. But here we're going with more classical tropes of Pulp Adventure, and like Vieja Escuela, a character class is defined by 4 things. 2 talents that allow you to do things that other people can't do or allow you to do it a little better. It gives you a weapons and armor restriction. Here it's more weapons restriction. It gives you a hit dice, and eventually you're going to have attack progression, and some classes have access to something called pulp points, which allows them to do interesting things. It's like magic points, but in a pulp setting. So the 5 playable classes are Professor, Treasure Hunter, Tough Guy, Dilettante, or here it's like a patron. You are wealthy, you are sociable, and the Buddy. Those are the 5 classes, and each has a particular hit die and has talents that we will go into in the next page. Like Vieja Escuela, there are 6 skills. Vieja Escuela does have skills, but it's just 6. Alertness, which is all sorts of perception rolls, communication, which is social interaction, manipulation, which is fine motor skills, lore, stealth, and survival. They're the same skills from the fantasy game are plugged in the game. And this is the great equalizer. Most of the rolls that you do in this game are skill rolls. They're not ability rolls. The rules say you'd only do an ability roll when you don't have anything else to go into. But what really keeps characters alive, what really makes characters interesting is their experience. It's their skills. It's not that they're unnaturally strong or dexterous or intelligent. It is this progression that the characters do, and they invest in different skills, and that is what helps them get ahead. Then you go shopping. 3d8 times $10. I checked with the author. This is a typo. It's 3d8 times $10, and then you buy weapons or equipment. Very pulpy. You have a machete, knife. Of course, firearms are available in this setting, although not all character classes are as good as using them as others. You have some level of defense, +1, +2, +3. There's no plate mail, there's no chain mail here, so this makes the game, in my opinion, way more lethal than the fantasy one. Also because you have firearms, a torch, a canteen, rope, climbing gear, scuba gear, dynamite, grenades, radio, gas mask, a camera, first aid kit. Very bare bones equipment list, but you can complement it if you have, for example, Call of Cthulhu, and depends on when you are playing, in the 20s, in the 40s, in the 50s. It's easy to get these equivalences of what things cost back then, certainly online, and then you can equip your character. True to its Vieja Escuela frame, you have backgrounds. Backgrounds are strong elements of the character's past that might influence how you play the character, but also mechanically might give you bonuses or penalties in certain situations. You might be a professor, but you used to be in the military. That character will play differently than others. You have movement. We have no races, so everybody moves the same. Hit points, defense, attack, instinct, which is a bonus modifier, which is like saving. If you saw the video about Vieja Escuela, when you are threatened by something dangerous, you do an instinct roll. If it's high, you have a high number to beat. If it's low, it's a low number to beat. And this instinct modifier increases with your experience. And finally, pulp points, which allow certain classes to do particular effects during a session of play. We have the advance table. As you see, characters only go up to 5. This means that this game is particularly good for doing one-shots or short campaigns. But as we have seen, the game is extremely hackable, so you can just continue doing the math and increase the level of your characters if they survive long enough to be a 6th, 7th level character in this game. Unlikely, given the nature of the genre, but mathematically possible and very easy to retro hack into the game. Here we have a list of the talents of the 5 classes. So professors have, I read it in a book. You can spend 1 pulp point to know any fact, to have an immediate success in any lore role. Or you're a social chameleon. You can interact with new peoples and societies. You can address the leader of this Bedouin band of raiders, or if you are interacting with aliens, then probably the professor should do the talking. If you're the treasure hunter, you have your roguish wink, your literally your angel smile. You are very good at deceiving or confusing people. You have fresh ideas. You can jerry-rig things. You can come up with creative ways of, for example, escaping. You've been put in a cell by the Gestapo agents, and you MacGyver your way out of things. You take a paperclip and you open your handcuffs. You dilettantes, or the patrons, have money and they have contacts. They spend pulp points to connect with people that you might need in the course of the adventure. Tough guys are strong, they're resistant, and buddies are lucky. And when they are together with the person they're buddies with, they can spend pulp points to give bonuses to other people. They're a great support character. These are the talents. As I said, I don't see it impossible to import other character classes like the warrior or the rogue from a different game if the setting warrants it, but here it's 5 traditional pulp classes. After creating characters, we go into the rules of the game, which are taken verbatim from Vieja Escuela. You have the D20 plus skill or plus ability modifier mechanic here in play. So if there is a check, you pick one of the 6 skills, or you pick one of the 6 attributes abilities, and the GM sets a DC, a difficulty, which there's a chart here. If it's very easy, like why you're even rolling. If it's complex or hurried, 11 or more. Difficult or stressful, 14 or more. Very difficult, very stressful, 17. Extremely difficult or in record time, 20 or more. And then you roll, you add the skill or the ability. Vieja Escuela is, as we said in the review for the fantasy version of the game, based on modern mechanics but a old school heart. And this D20 plus something roll for high is the basic mechanic in the entire game. The other modification is advantage and disadvantage, which can be granted either by talents of the different classes or by backgrounds. This is where your role-playing choices, your flavor for the character, can have a mechanical difference. If you spend 10 years living in Polynesia and you're going to interact with the local chief, then you're going to have advantage. And this is given by the background of your character, not by something in your class. It's specific to your character. Time control, it's given here in 10-second rounds and 10-minute turns. And combat is pretty standard ascending armor class, which here is called defense, D&D standard. You have initiative, as in Vieja Escuela Fantasy, is determined by dexterity. There you don't roll for initiative, rules is written. You act in order of dexterity, and then if you're in melee, you add your strength modifier, if any, your attack modifier to the D20, and you have to hit either the number of defense of the adversary or more, and then you make the damage according to the hit points. This is pretty standard. Rules is written, there is no critical hits or botches. Interesting difference with the fantasy game. Death and healing work just like in Vieja Escuela, the fantasy game. When you get to 0 hit points, that doesn't mean that you die. That means that you are incapacitated and you have 10 rounds, that's 1.5 minutes, before you are dead. For such a lethal game, I think it gives the characters a fighting chance of not necessarily dying in the first 5 minutes. So this is something that, although not strictly old school, I really like about Vieja Escuela and Vieja Escuela Pulp. As I said, I think the presence of firearms and the lack of armor makes this game more lethal, so you will need this buffer of 10 rounds for healing so your characters can live at least another day. A character heals as many hit points as their level for an entire day of rest. Instincts, which are the Vieja Escuela way of saying saving throws, work exactly like the fantasy game. You have an instinct bonus that is given by the experience level of the character, different classes, and you add to this instinct bonus a relevant ability modifier if you have one. If you're dodging something, it's dexterity. If you're resisting poison, it's constitution. If it's mind control, it's charisma. They give you a table here to characterize what ability is involved in each instinct roll, and then you add it to a D20 roll against a DC set by the game master according to difficulty. And if you succeed, then you avoid part of the danger or all of it, and if you don't, then you're in deep trouble. level. Experience, same simple level. You get between 2 or 3 experience points per game session. Whenever you reach a multiple of 10, you level up. You get new hit points. You do not get new talents. This is a difference from Vieja Escuela, the fantasy game. There you could go and become a baron, a wizard in the tower, and you would get extra backgrounds and extra talents at a certain level. Here, since it all goes up to 5, your talents are pretty much the tools you begin with, and you will only get more hit points, you will get more attack bonuses, more instinct, but you do not get either new backgrounds or new talents. Rules is written. And finally, in one page, the game addresses a core concept of pulp games, which is the Macguffin Magic. You are usually looking for mystical artifacts, and they can do stuff that regular things can't do. So here it gives you a very broad introduction to these kind of MacGuffins. It gives you 3 examples, some boots that allow you to give extra movement, a healing gloves that can give you magic hit points, or kind of a cloak of elven kind. It's a obfuscation cape, and they all rely on you spending pulp points, which limits certain classes from using magical artifacts. Only the professor, the patron or dilettante, and the buddy get pulp points. The tough guy and the treasure hunter don't get pulp points. This is echoing the inability of certain classes in Vieja Escuela to use magical artifacts. Fighters can't use magical artifacts in Vieja Escuela, and in the same way here, these artifacts can only be used by certain classes. 1-2 paragraphs, you can create either mystical MacGuffins. In my games, I would put maybe like a little bit more steampunk, more technology. I love the Rocketeer series, so that is certainly something that I'm going to be putting in, but it falls in this category. It's things that use PowerPoints to be activated. And the shortest bestiary that I have ever seen, it's, monsters exist in some pulp settings. They're determined by their level, which what we would call the hit dice, between 1 and 5, and that level determines their hit dice, which also determines their hit points, their attack bonus, and their instinct bonus. So whether you're chasing the Yeti or zombies or dinosaurs that have survived in some forbidden valley some way, here you can take and easily import beasts and monsters from other games, and using this very intuitive level system, create monsters and adversaries for your players. It also suggests that if you're going to create human adversaries, the character rolling system is so simple that you can fully fledge out like the nemesis of the adventure, and has their stats and talents of their own, which might match the characters or might not match the characters. You might be fighting, for example, and this is my idea, doesn't say here in the text, but you might be fighting people with supernatural abilities. Think of maybe the Mandarin or a Hydra, this overlapping of tech and mysticism and magic. So here the bestiary is 3 very short paragraphs. It would have been nice a couple of examples, but I think there is so much material in other games that it is not that necessary. And as you can see, we're on page 8, and this is the end of the game. We have character creation and rules. The game could end here. We have 16 more pages. The game clocks in at 25 pages in the printed edition. And what we have next is an adventure. It's an adventure for level 1 characters called La Doncella de Oro, the Golden Maiden. Egyptian flavored, set in New York in the 30s, very pulpy. The mob is involved. I'm not going to spoil it. I'm not going to show you any of the material. I'm going to maybe show you a map, because in Ecomenica did the maps for the adventures, and they're really, really cool. But when you get the game, you can start playing pretty much out of the box, if it had a box. So here's a quick glimpse at Ecomunica's map of an undisclosed location, which you will find out if you play the adventure. It comes with 3 pre-generated characters. Mary Jane Taylor, who is a buddy, and she is the niece of Professor Thaddeus Taylor, who is a professor at NYU, professor of archaeology. And they come together with the treasure hunter Duncan O'Sullivan, an old sea wolf from the Amazon River. And we have 3 pre-generated characters ready to play. The artwork for the pre-generated character sheets is done by Manu Saez, which is the author of Vieja Escuela Wild West. An awesome game. I really hope to get to show you one of these days. And an appendix which has an example of play. Vieja Escuela is a game that is incredibly easy to learn how to play, but it does at least assume that the game master knows what she is doing. As many other games do, it does not introduce you, oh, this is a role-playing game and these are the different dice. It assumes you've played before, and I think Vieja Escuela Pulp, because Ramon Balcells is known for doing the role with family, he is a little bit more pedagogical, so he added this appendix with an example. It's 2 pages. It uses the pre-gens that I just showed you to say this is how you play a role-playing game. Character sheet and OGL. And this is the back cover. It's a quotation from one of the pre-gens, Duncan O'Sullivan, the seaworthy captain, the guide in the Amazon, kind of rough around the edges, says, I meet things that I can't explain coming from another world, and I always do the same. I drink a heavy shot of whiskey, I breathe deep, and I hit it with all my strength. So in a nutshell, this is the game. It is pulp adventure from the 30s, 40s, 50s. Although there's been expansions, for example, of the new games that are being written for Vieja Escuela that assume more modern takes. For example, the Gulf War in the 1990s. So what I think about this game, I love about this game everything I love about Vieja Escuela, in the sense they're the same game. It's the same rule set and it's the same philosophy. Ease of play, it is old school in spirit without having all of these maybe Gygaxian mechanics that are not familiar to younger players, can be a little confusing. It focuses on rulings, not rules. It focuses on player ability, not character ability. And it is a demonstration that this system, as with many OSRs, people think OSR games are limited to recreating Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy. Well, that is their DNA. But Vieja Escuela Pulp and the other Vieja Escuela and all the other adaptations show that this system is rich with possibilities. You can take it to space, you can take it to pulp adventures, and you have to modify it here and there, but the basic skeleton, the basic DNA of the game can allow for the same immersive play, social interaction, and lot of fun that D&D does in fantasy, and that Vieja Escuela Fantasy distills into an easier rule set, which is now being exported, in my opinion, very successfully and very simply to a pulp context. And the book comes with adventures. It will take you a half an hour to read this book, so you can go from not knowing how to play it to having an adventure and characters and be on the board in half an hour. So a game that I really love and that I hope you will download and consider playing. As I'm saying, the translation into English is forthcoming, but I'm going to see if I can post a draft, at least of the rules part. For Rol Añejo, this has been your DM Pablo. Keep playing, keep having fun, and until I see you again.